Hello people of the internet, welcome back to my channel. This is a first laps video, aka a first impressions video on NASCAR Heat 4. Ironically, in the week that Need for Speed Heat is dropping, I thought, well, it's a game with Heat in the title. Close enough, let's talk about it. But before we do, let's give a little bit of context. I have been playing NASCAR games pretty much my entire life, going way back to Days of Thunder on the NES. I mean, not an official NASCAR game and not a very good game in general, but I played a lot of hours of NASCAR 2000 on the PS1, and for many people, NASCAR gaming in general peaked around the mid-2000s with the likes of NASCAR 05 Chase for the Cup, NASCAR 06 Total Team Control, and the one I put the most hours into, NASCAR 07. And then we enter the 2010s where things got pretty, it wasn't a good time. For the early part of the 2010s, the license was held by Technics. You remember who they are? Yes, that's right, they're the people that made Ride to Hell Retribution. Now, I have it on good authority that the first one of their games, NASCAR The Game, was actually pretty decent. I never actually played it. I came in at NASCAR 14, where, in theory, should be even better, right? No, it remains to this day probably the worst NASCAR game and a contender for one of the worst racing games I have ever played in my life. It was atrocious. Finally, the license went away from Technics and went to this new startup company, Duesenberry Martin Racing. And NASCAR Heat Evolution was alright. I liked it for what it was. A startup, basically an indie company, working on not quite a shoestring budget, but, you know, not the same monolith of resources as a AAA developer. Sorry, AAA. That's just in case Jim Sterling's watching. But for what it's worth, I thought it was quite a good game. So at the time, I remember putting a lot of hours into it. I put a lot of videos out around it, and then I sort of left the scene altogether. But I have kept tabs on the game since then. Since then, they kind of used the original Evolution game as a jumping off point. They built this whole new fleshed out career mode, and the game had sort of looked like it was taking steps forward every year, which is kind of what I always wanted from the series. I knew NASCAR Heat Evolution wasn't a great game on its own, but as a bare kind of minimum, a bare foundation, it was a decent starting point, and it would kind of look better in hindsight if, and only if, the game series evolved from that starting point. But guess what? It hasn't stayed at that level, and with NASCAR Heat 4, I think we've kind of seen the biggest single step forward in this lineage so far. For starters, the graphics are totally redone, and I have to say, they look fantastic. Would say though that it seems to have come at the cost of performance. I noticed when I was playing it was quite choppy. There were some times where it looked like it lagged or it stuttered a little bit. Never deal breaking, but it is something to bear in mind. It does look great, but maybe that's the trade-off. It doesn't stay rock solid frame rate the whole way through. And that's kind of the same with the sound design as well. The sound design is fabulous. At last, they're finally not using the same old recycled low-res sound effects from the early 2000s. They've finally got up-to-date sound design, and it sounds phenomenal. It's really good. But like the graphics, it seems to have come at a cost of performance, because I did notice quite a few times like a sort of stuttering or a distortion, or sometimes even what sounded like a tearing. Maybe that's tied to the graphics. Maybe that's when the frame rate stutters, the sound tears a little bit. I don't know. I'm not a games developer. Again, not a deal breaker. When the sound is working, it's great. And even when it malfunctioned, it didn't majorly malfunction. Like going back to something like NASCAR 14, there were once times where the sound would bug out so badly that your spotter would just stop working 5 laps in. You'd come into the pits and you'd have the world's first ever completely silent pit stop. So there's nothing on that level here, which is good. Now, one of the things I mentioned earlier about NASCAR Heat Evolution was that I was really impressed with the AI in that game. Believe it or not, like real NASCAR, making NASCAR games is tricky, and I honestly think one of the most difficult things a NASCAR game can do, or any game simulating oval racing, is the feeling of racing close together and programming AI that can drive close to you, can even nudge you a little bit without suddenly sort of reacting suddenly and just sort of veering around all over the place and crashing into the wall, or randomly just sending up the inside and punting you straight into the wall at 200 miles an hour, or engaging in things like pack racing and bump drafting and things like that. These are all things that are very tricky to do in games for an AI racing driver, and I was impressed that Heat Evolution on a core level managed to do that. The AI still wasn't perfect. There was bugs like somehow they'd fly into the pits about 100 miles an hour faster than you did, like they had infinite grip on the pit entry and you didn't. Fortunately, not only have those bugs long gone by the time of NASCAR Heat 4, I would say that the AI is even better than ever. The pack racing AI on the restrictor plate tracks, the big tracks like Daytona and Talladega, absolutely phenomenal. I ran a race at Daytona doing the gameplay and my first impressions for this game, and I have never, ever driven any NASCAR game before where I've been able to sort of, especially at Daytona, which is the narrower of the two tracks. Talladega's a lot wider. It's a lot harder to race up through the pack by drafting and sort of moving in between sort of cars as they move around, trying to get the draft and bump draft each other and fall back and stuff like that. Very rarely have I been able to do that consistently without causing at least one massive pileup. In this game, I managed it, and it was absolutely thrilling. It was great stuff. Actually, again, feels like you are driving against real NASCAR drivers. That's a big compliment. The only thing I would say about the AI is that in my experience so far, they seem a little bit easy. On 95 difficulty, which is kind of the defaultish one, I kind of was winning races right off the bat as soon as I booted the game up. And even on 105, which is max difficulty, I kind of feel like I still had the pace on the field without even much practice. It is worth pointing out there is an absolute litany of other options that you can tweak relating to how the AI drive and how you drive. It almost reminds me of something like the gameplay sliders in like a FIFA or an NBA game. Those little options to tweak how the gameplay and the AI behave are really nice. I might have to go and tweak some of those to make more of a challenge in the game. Don't get me wrong, I wasn't winning every single race by like 3 laps at a canter, but once I got a few laps in and I got into a rhythm, it did feel quite easy to start passing AI cars even at the front of the field. I think for most people it will be more than enough. You'll be able to find a difficulty level that is more than enough of a challenge. Now, one thing this game doesn't lack for is stuff. As in, stuff to do. There's the career mode, which I must admit, at time of recording, I haven't played yet, only because I played the career mode in NASCAR Heat 3, I was very satisfied with it, and I'm assuming, unless something's gone terribly wrong, it wouldn't have gotten much worse than last year. Maybe it has improved, and I can find that out later down the line. Along with, you know, your single races, your championships mode, where you can either run just the standard NASCAR schedule for either series, or you can run a series of fancy schedules and stuff. I love the fact that, and this reminded me of NASCAR 2000, which did something similar, there are championships dedicated just to the road courses that are in NASCAR and the short tracks. So if you want to do a 6-race season that is just featuring tracks like Bristol, Martinsville, Iowa, Richmond, stuff like that, you can do it. I like there's a nice touch. The only thing I would prefer is the ability to make your own custom schedule, but maybe they'll add that at some point. Alongside that, there's a really fun challenges mode, which has been around in the game for a while, but I never remember it being this engaging. They're like sort of scenario modes, but they're small sort of random scenarios. So for example, there was one where I started like 20 seconds behind a small group of cars, and I had to catch them on, pass them in 2 laps. The one I had the most fun with was a wreck avoidance challenge at Daytona. I'd be at the back of this pack of like 25 odd cars, and then 2 massive wrecks would trigger on the back straight, and I'd have to weave my way through them, basically staying flat out to catch up with the top 2 cars that survived both the wrecks. But it was a lot of fun. I was having fun even redoing those challenges. And one thing I like the most about challenges mode, there's genuine unlockables. As in, you unlock special paint schemes and skins for each driver, which is great. You have a reason to do them. It's like what you used to do in video games. Play them to unlock stuff to use in the game that you're playing. Not just play the game and sort of look over at a bunch of locked stuff in the corner that it's just like, you ain't got your mum's credit card, you ain't coming over here. I like that. That's very cool. And do you know one other thing that's really cool that's in this game? Split screen multiplayer. I don't know if I've just not been paying attention, but it really feels like not many games these days even bother with split screen multiplayer. Well, racing games anyway. They're just like, well, you've got online. Why does your mate have to come over to your house to play the game with you without, you know, oddsing for dodgy connection and dodgy servers and dodgy noobs online and whatever. So it's just nice to have a split screen option. But I swear, since the PS3, Xbox 360 generation, there's just not really been split screen multiplayer modes in many racing games. So it's cool that it is here. Speaking of online multiplayer though, I feel like the game probably didn't get the best of rep when that clip from the, I think it was the official NASCAR esports series, the one where someone's leading going into the final turn at ISM Raceway, I think it is, and someone just yeets straight up the inside at full speed, bounces off the wall like a pinball, and then just wins easily without suffering any repercussions for basically nosing straight into a wall and another competitor at 160 miles an hour. Yeah, that was not a good look. I think that's more of a mistake of trying to make NASCAR Heat 4 an esports platform when it kind of isn't. I wouldn't say it's enough of a simulatory sort of game for that. I did manage one race in online multiplayer. It was okay. A little bit of lagging from some other guys. There was only about 3 of us left in a 8-car field by the end of the race after multiple people disconnected. I have no idea if that was because of genuine connection issues or rage quits. Based on some of the driving I saw, it's quite likely a lot of them were the latter, but we move. And it also helps that I won the race. So, you know, 10 out of 10, great. So having played it for a total of about 4 to 5 hours so far, between a couple of hours on stream and a few more hours playing on the day I'm recording this, I have to kind of conclude that I've not really had as much fun with any NASCAR game as I have with NASCAR Heat 4, probably since NASCAR 07. I did give context at the top of this video that a lot of the NASCAR games, especially in the early 2010s, were pretty mediocre. That's being very kind to them. So maybe it's not the highest bar to clear, but believe it or not, it actually is, because NASCAR 07 is by a distance probably the best NASCAR game I have played. On consoles, don't come at me, NR 2003 fanboys, but the fact that I'm having equal amounts of fun with NASCAR Heat 4 is a very good sign. I have yet to get bored of this game, which is unlike me. There are even games like Grid and the F1 games, which I really like, but I do sort of tire after a while. I get a few rounds into career mode and I'm like, do you know what? I've had my fill with this game. But 5 hours or so in with NASCAR Heat 4, I'm still enjoying it. I want to just go in and race. I didn't even mention the handling model. The handling is quite nice. It feels, I'd say it goes for that SimCady vibe, like most console NASCAR games have been. It feels heavy. There's a nice amount of feel through the wheel. I played it all on my Thrustmaster T150 steering wheel, and it felt good. And there's a good amount of assists and everything for whatever level of play that you're at, and if you're playing on a pad. But I had a good time with this on a wheel, especially on the ovals. I felt like the handling was very intuitive. I could kind of get into a rhythm and suss out where the grooves were on the track, what was working for my car setup. There are even times where I was like, wow, this car's so tight. Wait a minute, I can move a lane or so up the banking in the corners. There we go, it's working a lot better, just like real NASCAR. But overall, I do stand by what I've said. This is probably the most fun I've had with a NASCAR game in a very, very long time. It kind of feels like the first NASCAR game in a while that we can judge alongside other racing games rather than purely on its own merits in a very contextual box. This kind of feels like the first NASCAR game in a while where you can unironically just put it down as a good racing game. You don't necessarily have to be a fan of NASCAR to enjoy this game. I mean, hell, I've not watched any NASCAR in the best part of, well, 3, nearly 4 years, and I still got a kick out of this game in a big way. I think a lot of that has to do with how customizable you can make the experience, how much you can tailor it to your interest, combined especially with the AI, which is, you know, far and away some of the best oval racing AI I've ever driven against in any game. I end up being sucked into it. I end up being immersed. I end up willingly cranking up the length of the race and driving longer and longer races, wanting to get more involved in strategy and race my way back up through the field and see the ebb and flow of a race and how other drivers come and go throughout the field. It feels very believable for what is not straight up a simulator game, and I think that's a big compliment. As first impressions go, I want to play more of it is probably the most positive first impression you can leave. So that's been my first impressions video on NASCAR Heat 4. Hope you've enjoyed it. If you have played it yourself, let me know down in the comments what you're thinking about it. Subscribe if you're new around here. Give this video a thumbs up if you have enjoyed it. Follow me on my Twitch channel to get notifications when I stream live over there. I try and do it about 2 or 3 times a week over there. I've been AJ. I'll see you guys soon.